what he actually said is, I know Putin. I have a great relationship with Putin. I can call him. And so I think what he intends to do, literally, is call Putin and tell him to stop the war, and tell him that if he doesn't stop the war by the day he becomes president, January 20th, then we're just going to give Ukraine whatever they need, and he can see how he likes that. But the goal is to end the war.
He is now back. President-elect Trump has pledged that his foreign policy will put America first. He's repeatedly claimed that he could end the war in Ukraine in a day. But many fear that this could be the beginning of the end for Ukraine when it comes to its fight with Russia. Without American money and support, the nation would be at Vladimir Putin's mercy. So what is in Trump's mind? Kurt Volker was Donald Trump's special representative for Ukraine until September 2019, when he resigned. So you might think he's very critical of Donald Trump, very gloomy about the future. I'm not sure that is exactly what happened in this interview.
When he met with President Zelensky in September in New York, they had a private meeting, and then he came out and did a stand-up for the press. And Trump said, there has to be peace. We need to have peace. We need to end the war. But he also said it has to be a fair peace, which is the first time that I've heard him say something like that. And I think that that is significant because I think he understands that this is a war of Russian aggression. Doesn't think it should have happened, doesn't think it would have happened if we had shown more strength. And so we need to stop it by convincing Putin that he will never win here. So I think this is actually not such a bad scenario.
I understand what you're saying there. I guess what's still not clear to anyone is the mechanics of how those things will then work in reality, because you have an attritional war which Putin has thrown people into and continues to throw people into. You have the Ukrainians who do not want to cede an inch of their land to Russia. So even with all of those sentiments, I'm not quite sure what lever does Trump pull, because he's not going to go all-out war with Russia on behalf of Ukraine. Quite the opposite. So what can he do?
So first off, let me call your attention to an op-ed done by Trump's Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, and David Urban, a surrogate communicator for the Trump campaign, back in August. It was in the Wall Street Journal, and it was the Trump plan for Ukraine. And what this said is we're going to increase U.S. energy exports, going to drive down energy prices, be good for our economy, it'll be good for the globe. It'll be bad for Russia's war budget. It'll be bad for Iran. Second thing is, instead of American taxpayer aid for Ukraine, we shouldn't be giving them aid, but we can give them loans, and we can give them large loans, just like we did for the UK in World War II. Lend-lease policy for Ukraine, give them whatever they need. They can borrow as much as they want, buy American defense equipment. So those are two big things that I think he can put on the table. But what he actually said is, I know Putin. I have a great relationship with Putin. I can call him. And so I think what he intends to do, literally, is call Putin and tell him to stop the war, and tell him that if he doesn't stop the war by the day he becomes president, January 20th, then we're just going to give Ukraine whatever they need, and he can see how he likes that. But the goal is to end the war.
There's a danger here, is there not? In the understandable flurry of post-election, the glow, I suppose, of post-election success, where he has been given this tremendous mandate by the US people, unquestionably, is us to forget that he says all things all the time that he never then does. You know, he said he'd end the war between North Korea and South Korea. He didn't do that. A lot of his global pronunciations were high on rhetoric and low on actual practical result. And I guess that's the fear, isn't it? That he's not necessarily on the world stage. He's a good talker and he's maverick. Did he ever deliver anything in 4 years?
He lifted the arms embargo on Ukraine. If you remember, Obama had an arms embargo. We would not sell them any lethal defensive equipment at all. And Trump got rid of that and provided them their first anti-tank systems, and that opened the door to lots of allies providing lethal arms, and probably saved them in February of 22 when Russia did the full-scale invasion. He also closed down the Russian consulate in San Francisco, which, in hindsight, it was a brilliant move because it was only a spying operation on Silicon Valley. And he basically said, we're just going to shut it down. We're just not even going to have that. He also threw out about 80 intelligence officers from New York and Washington. And he really went after Germany and the Nord Stream 2 pipeline because he quite correctly said at the time that we are paying for your defense and you are giving the money to Russia against whom we're supposed to defend you. So this makes no sense at all. You need to shut down the pipeline. So he had a lot of the right ideas and a lot of the right policies. And I think that we have to differentiate between his desire to maintain the ability to negotiate with an authoritarian leader, so person to person, from the desire to take tough policies to shape the playing field for that negotiation.
Yeah.
And I think that is what he did in the past and what I would expect again.
Will he pull out of NATO?
No. If you remember, even when he was bragging during his campaign stops about, I told Putin do whatever the hell he wants. The point of that story was explaining how he got NATO allies, European allies, to spend more on defense. So the point was not about killing NATO. The point was about strengthening NATO and getting Europeans to pay more.
And he was right about that. I mean, no one denies that, do they? I mean, he was right about that.
He actually was right about it. And now you look at the facts, and when he took office in 2017, there were 3 NATO allies paying 2% or more of GDP on defense. Now it's 23. So it has been a sea change since when he first made those kind of threats.
And you resigned from working with him. Would you work with him again?
It depends. I have to be asked, to do something. I have not been invited to do anything.
I guess the question is, could you work with him?
Well, he's the elected president, will be the elected president again of the United States. He gets to decide. We all have to respect that. And the question is, can you be helpful? Can you make a difference to have good policies, to do things like make sure Russia's defeated in Ukraine?
That was Kurt Volker, who's Donald Trump's special representative for Ukraine, and very sanguine about the prospects of Donald Trump, and it would even work with him again. It's a funny old thing. People are at least, it feels like he's getting a fair wind a little bit, Donald Trump. Now, whether he abuses that or uses that is an interesting question, but there are people now who think, well, he's powerful and maybe not that bad a thing.
People in charge of the Russian government, including President Putin, that they basically would welcome any departure from that very unhappy period Russia had with the United States during the Obama and particularly the Biden administration. Actually, I have to say that it was not a very happy period when Trump was in office before. But any departure from that, creeping escalation against Russia, Russian responses to this escalation, I think, obviously, should be welcome in Moscow. And I think it is basically being welcome in Moscow, which is not to say that Russia have done anything to promote such an outcome. And second, it is not to say that Russia is not aware of past experience and certainly does not expect that President Trump would start making unilateral concessions. It is understood that he has his own agenda. He is not a Russian friend. He is an American patriot, and it is not going to be easy. I view the situation with the war of Ukraine differently than it is common in Washington and London. I think that Russia was subjected to NATO creeping aggression for many years, which was threatening the very foundations of the Russian state. And Russia had every reason, and certainly every right, to respond using those resources which were available to Moscow. That he could do it in 48 hours. I think probably I would give him a week. If you deny a person an opportunity to be paid for that, most journalists I am not demanding that you yield a single inch of the territory you already control. But if you don't like that, that's your sovereign decision. But you would have to do this without American participation. If Trump said that, I do not believe that Zelensky would be able to say no. To some, I talk on a regular basis. The Russian political elite, who was extremely sympathetic for the United States, absurdly often sympathetic to the United States for many years, they were gradually coming to a conclusion that their love was rejected, that their consents were neglected, that their appeals were not listened to, and that the only language which the United States would understand would be force.